Shut up, I told the trees. I'm trying not to die. They just answered back with a whisper. Good enough. I looked around, pushing away despair. I had completely lost my bearings, had so for a while, but I refused to be bones found by some old bloodhound in 5 years. No, I would get out of this one, I told myself, and I would become a better person. Or something. I had been walking on what could be a trail for what I thought was an hour. I saw the sun going down to my left, just over the tree line, so north was up ahead. I felt a moment of pride in my deduction that lasted all of 10 seconds. Okay, fine, there's north. But where the hell do these woods end? And most important, how in God's name did I get here? Had to find higher ground, I thought. Try to make some sense of where the fuck I was. Those survival movies had to do some good in my life. But where? I had thick woods on either side of the trail, and they didn't seem to slope up any way. Said trees were towering thingamaboobs, which I couldn't climb if I knew how. Boy, this city life really came back to bite me in the ass. So I had just 2 choices. Either walk back to where I woke up, or keep walking to see where I ended up. Considering how much I thought I had walked option, one did not appeal immediately. But then I thought I might find out more about what happened to me. So I guess we walk back. Retrace steps. Whatever. Some bird called out. First sound of life other than the trees I had heard in a while. Fine by me. Did not want bugs or bears in this adventure. I head back where I came from. While I walked back, I tried to remember what strange chain of events ended with yours truly walking in the woods. I knew I hadn't been exactly a shining light of virtue, but come on. Little too far, if you ask me. I tried to remember what was the last thing I remembered before being stuck here. The haziness of said memory told me that I had been drugged. Heavily, if it had been enough to knock me out. Who was with me? Larry? Meg? Sharon? Tendrils of shame and concern always came with that name to my head. Sharon had the 3B's, brains, bod, and bat shittiness. When we met, I remember thinking that no women that smart should be that hot. Because she read and studied as much as she went to the gym. But she had been wronged by every man she dated. I was so randy for her that I didn't realize how sensible she was to that. She made me promise 10 times I would never hurt her. And I took one look at that perfect body and said, sure, babe, I promise. When all I really wanted was that body. Bragging rights. But I couldn't settle on just one, now could I? Also, she was intense. Insecure. Jealous, of course. But she knew how to treat her man correctly. No matter how much of an ingrate said man was. We dated for a year, even moved in, till she found me enjoying the company of another woman. She did not take that well, I think. She disappeared for a year. A whole year. She walked in on me banging the cleaning girl from next door in the kitchen. She was carrying pizza and beer. She just looked at us. She placed the food on the table next to the door. The counter was, well, occupied. Went to her room, picked up her laptop, walked out. Never said a word. And I was too annoyed, embarrassed, something, to say anything or follow. I called her the next day. She didn't pick up. None of the 10 times I tried. When I texted her, I had a "this number does not exist" message. She quit her job. She moved out of the city. She closed all social media, shut down her email. She basically vanished. Any other guy in my position would just let it go. But you didn't see her face when she walked out of that apartment. You hadn't seen the tiny little signs that she was more than intense about everything. I didn't look for her again after a month, but I kept feeling jittery, like she would jump out from the bushes. It was insane to just up and vanish like that. As I kept walking back to the clearing, the memories became a little clearer. I was minding my own business in a bar, by myself. It had been a good week. I had no one to celebrate with, though. So I just went to the local hole and saw a band and drank. And then, what? I reached the clearing where I had woken up. There were nothing I could see that helped me. No sign of human activity. I couldn't see any way into the clearing other than the path I was on. So what? I was just airdropped in? How knocked out was I? Another bird called out. Or it was the same one as before. A raven? Who knows? Who cares? Except, I was no nature geek, but I did notice that it had been the only sound I had heard. This seemed a largish forest, certainly thick with trees. So why didn't I hear any more birds? Why didn't I hear anything? The first true sense of unease hit me. Fuck that. I was scared, but scared would not get me out of here. I breathed in, deep. Let it go. I sat down on a fallen trunk, trying to look relaxed, indifferent. I didn't so much look at the trees around me as gaze at them. I had no idea what to look for. I just wandered with my eyes. I stopped at one particular tree. One big round thing with leaves as green and shiny as new tiles. I looked for another second to make sure I wasn't just imagining it, walked up, and confirmed. There was an arrow carved onto the bark. I don't know if recent, if by accident. Can those things happen by accident? Did something claw the arrow there? But it was a sign that I had not been the first human being in these here woods. I scrambled closer. The arrow seemed to have been made by a small knife, since it wasn't that deep, and it was pointing down. The soil did in fact look like someone, had moved it at some point. Fear stroked the back of my neck again, and I wildly looked around, convinced that whoever put me here was out there watching me somehow. Is this some fucking game? I yelled out, ignoring the madness I heard in my voice. What the hell do you want? Who the fuck are you? No answer. The bird did not call out. The trees just whispered again, maybe holding some conference call on who the loony in the dirty jeans was. Finey, I muttered. Fine, dot. I plunked on my knees and started digging. About halfway through, a dark shape started forming. It seemed leather or something. I dug a little more frantically, more than a little happy that I had found my first clue. But still with fear very much next to me. That fear sat right on my chest the moment I dug up the shape. Oh yeah, fear made a nice little cozy apartment in my brain at that moment. And the memory of the night before came rushing back. I had left the bar early, tipsy but not drunk, and I was just walking around, taking the long route home. When I passed an all-night coffee shop, someone called my name. Of course, it was Sharon. My tipsiness packed up and left in a hurry, and every hair in my body stood up. She had cut her hair, dyed it black, which made her creamy white skin stand out even more, plus those huge green eyes. She was carrying the object I was holding in my hand right now, a little Darth Vader backpack/purse. It was one of the things we had in common. Big party and sex animals, yes, but also huge Star Wars nerds. Buy me a coffee. Let's talk, she said. She didn't wait for an answer. She just walked in. She had my favorite pants on, the one that made that perfect ass look God made, and I hated myself for the pang of horniness that came with my uneasiness. As I stared at the cartoon Vader covered in soil, I cursed myself for being so easy. The bird. I was now convinced it was the same bird. Called out again. Was it closer? Fuck it, I had other things in mind. I carried the backpack to the trunk with unsteady hands as I remembered bringing the 2 coffees to where she sat, also with unsteady hands. I can't say I missed you, but it's good to see you, she said. Yeah, I bet it was, I told Darth as I stared into his cartoon masked face. I guess you're wondering where I've been this last year. Not really, no, I thought. Not sure I wanted to know either. I thought you never wanted to see me again, I said, like an idiot. Oh no, that really isn't true. I couldn't wait to see you again. Sharon, Don't worry, you'll have time to explain if that's required. Let's just make small talk for now. How are you? The plainness of the question caught me completely off guard. It made me not focus on the if that's required part. I told her, yeah, I'm fine, I remembered, as I unzipped the backpack. There were only 3 things inside. 2 ripe red apples, a mirror, and a note. I did not want to read the fucking note as much as I could not wait to read it. Fine? Just fine? You were doing pretty good at work, I remember. Well, yeah, I am. It's steady. Good gigs. I can't. Seeing anyone? Her face did not change with this question. I held her gaze. Kinda proud I managed that. No, I'm not seeing anyone. How's your mother? She died 6 months ago, I said immediately. Did she know that? As I saw the pale, haggard old 30-something staring back at me from the mirror, I thought now that, yeah, she must have known my mother died of a heart attack. I was close to my mother. It wasn't her fault I turned out this shitty. She died without the grandkids she so wanted. Sorry to hear that. She was a good woman. A good person. She loved you. I know, so did. She was taking out a pack of stevia. She could only take that, for some reason, I never knew. They fell out of Darth Vader. I instinctively bent down to grab them. Ever the gentleman. Of course, that's when she drugged me. It had to be. How the fuck she managed, who cares? That's when. You bitch, I whispered in the forest. The trees whispered back. Here you go, I said in the coffee shop. Ever the gentleman. Thank you, she said. So are we going to pretend you didn't fall off the face of the earth for a year? A year to the day, by the way. Or are you going to tell me where you've been? Because here's one thing I'd like to say, Sharon. That's not what normal people do. I'm not normal, baby. You should have known that by now. Hearing those words in my head sent an ice-cold shiver down my spine. They sounded harder in my head as I stared at the note. But the apples woke up my stomach, which spoke even harder. I had no idea what time it was. I didn't wear a watch. And of course, I didn't have my phone. But I was pretty sure the last thing I ate were the cheese sticks at the bar. More than a few hours ago. I left the country after I saw you guys, she went on. I went to Europe. Didn't quite backpack, but didn't go sightseeing either. I just wanted to get away. Not just from you, don't flatter yourself. From everything. But yeah, you were, I don't know, the catalyst? You know, the last straw. Last straw for what? This world has treated me like shit, man. I give and give, and all I get thrown back is turds and mud. So I decided to get away from the world. Find a new one, maybe. And I did. I made new friends in Eastern Europe, traveled to Greece, made new friends. Friends who could show me ways to, I don't know, right some wrongs. Her words became woozy after that. And then I woke up here. I knew the note would finally explain what happened here. And I know Sharon was to blame somehow. Friends. What friends? What the hell do they have to do with anything? But I felt so very scared to open it. And what the hell was the mirror for? The bird called out one more time, and now it really seemed close by. I looked around in the woods, but the trees just whispered away, maybe a little harder, hiding everything. Oh, fuck it! I opened the note. The apple of discord plus the apple of temptation. The note read, "Try them. While you see yourself wither away, your own true victim, say hi to the harpy for me." More than angry, I was confused and a little disappointed. That was a lame note. Sharon was truly off her rocker. And who the fuck was the harpy? I took one of the apples. I had a brief crazy image of the old Snow White movie, where the poisoned apple was all shiny and gleaming, and paranoid told me it's a trap. God. But my stomach had other ideas. I took a bite. The bird crashed through the branches, screaming at the top of its unholy lungs, diving straight towards me. It was as big as a vulture, but that wasn't the worst. It had tits. Huge old lady knockers that hung like a turkey's things over its chest. And what was worse, it had a face, a fucking old woman face, filled with teeth. And it screamed, and screamed, and I screamed. It tore the apple away from my hand, knocking me down with the force of its wing beats. It soared off and landed on a branch that bucked under its weight. It turned and looked at me. A hideous, absurd thing with an apple in its mouth. There was nothing but craziness in those eyes. Ancient madness. Like a parrot from hell, it took the apple from its mouth with one of its claws and started munching at it, never once taking its insane eyes off me. I slowly understood what lied ahead of me. I saw no other food anywhere except for the other apple. If I tried to eat it, this thing would take it away before I could. I could only see it rot, or know it would if I chose to get rid of it somehow. I would starve. And there was the mirror, eternal temptation, so I may see how I slowly deteriorate. All this because I porked someone else but her. I screamed again. The harpy just kept eating. What am I to do? The door to the secret passageway I found earlier has vanished. I have already tried searching for the catch with one hand hidden surreptitiously behind my back whilst pretending to drink from my water glass. The entire painted wall is now a seamless, solid panel. Access that way has been cut off. Whilst brushing my hair, I used the opportunity to toss my head around, trying to appear nonchalant, but frantically scanning every corner of the room for other ideas. In the dark gloom of the night, outside the glass doors on the balcony, I sense more than visualize the somehow threatening outline of a huge giant of a man. His head is completely shaved apart from a straggly ponytail, and he is so brawny he does not seem to possess a neck. Huge arms firmly crossed across his toned chest, the sleeves of his pristine white t-shirt strained to cover bulging biceps. His features look foreign. Asian? Maybe Japanesey. He reminds me of some kind of intimidating sumo wrestler. He has been crouching there, squatting on his haunches silently yet with infinite patience in the shadows against the wall since sunset. In all that time, his head has not moved an inch, but I feel him observing me constantly, just waiting for me to give him the smallest chance to uncross those powerful arms and pounce upon me. Under different circumstances, I might have found that muscular chest clearly suggesting a solid six-pack of pure strength rather attractive, but not here, not now. His ominous presence is too threatening, and I am becoming increasingly scared of him. The expression on the big man's face seems menacing, despite his mean features remaining totally immobile. His monolithed eyes are glued to a fixed spot straight ahead, but I know he is aware of my every move. Any attempt to escape that way via the balcony will prove impossible for sure. The solid oak door to the corridor outside this small square room seems to be beckoning to me. Could it possibly have been left unlocked? Might that be the way out of here? I must not show any expression of hope on my face or the big man might see. There are framed pictures on the wall, awful amateurish forest scenes, and prettily twee coastlines in weak, faded watercolors, which I pretend to admire, cocking my head on one side and scrutinizing the details, as I've seen people do in art exhibitions. As I examine each picture, I start gradually making my way towards the brown and black striped door, creeping ever so carefully in the direction of my longed-for freedom. Wham! The big man is suddenly only about a meter away from me. He is now standing squarely in front of the door, barring the way, still with those intimidating arms crossed across his chest. He is grinning at me, but in an eerily smug sort of way. At his full height, he looks well over 2 meters tall. He must have guessed my intention. I cannot retreat, though. I just know that would be a fatal mistake. This is it. It is now or never my only chance. I have got to be brave. I tell myself I can do it if I really try. Words from my mom and long-gone childhood suddenly ring out from nowhere. Never be afraid of anyone, babe. You can do anything if you really want to, you know. I must keep moving at all costs, but keep it slow and deliberate. The regular ticking of the clock, the gentle, insignificant hum of the heater, the distant drone of heavy traffic speeding by on the highway outside all simply fade away to nothing. I somehow manage to swallow, hold in my breath, stretch out my hand, and steel myself for the impact. There is a thunderous, pounding noise in my ears. My stomach is in knots. There is no impact. I cannot believe my own eyes. My hand reaches straight through him, directly to the handle, and I yank downwards, dragging it inwards with all of the force I can muster. But it is not heavy at all. The flimsy door flies open, knocking me off balance, the frail barrier swinging around like cardboard. Beyond lies my freedom. The sound of his demented laughter suddenly ricochets round the room, sending shivers fluttering down my spine. It is a cackling, nasty laugh. No time to waste here. I have to flee. I hurtle away from that place without knowing or caring which way to run. I'm heading left, chased by the awful sound of his sinister sniggering. It is not a raucous belly laugh, not a guffaw either, but it is far from a friendly chuckle. It is the kind of gleeful, smirky snigger a cat might make if it could, when toying with a terrified, cornered mouse. Ahead lies a long, empty corridor with scores of identical doors lining both sides. Floor, ceiling, and walls are all painted a dazzling clinical white. It resembles a hospital. The thudding of my bare feet on the glacial ceramic tiles seems muffled, and I have the bizarre thought that the sound is being absorbed by the walls themselves. I almost miss a sudden turning to my right and belatedly grab hold of the wall, hurling myself blindly round the corner, both arms flailing as I recover my step. There is a staircase in front of me and I hesitate. Do I go up or down? I am too slow. The big man has leapt from the floor above and landed without a sound on all fours in front of me, his head low to the ground, with both of his unblinking, slanted eyes fixated on me. They are black, predatory eyes. It is an almost reptilian stare. I am unable to look away. Like a rabbit caught in a headlight, I am powerless to move. My limbs are paralyzed. As he inches forward, preparing to pounce, his nostrils quiver. He smells my fear. I shrink away down into myself. He lunges. I shriek. The The predator has his prey. His icy fingers surround my neck in a steely grip. Some deep-rooted instinct within me awakens the will to retaliate, and I begin grappling for my life. My thrashing fingers find his face, and I succeed in raking my nails across the side of his cheek. Whoa, oh. He bellows in rage, then squeezes harder. A foggy grayness hovering at the outside edges of my vision grows darker and thicker. He jerks his hands, and then there is only blackness and silence. I swim, and the world spins. An intense brightness, a kaleidoscope of colors. I struggle to open my eyes and make out the familiar outline of a photo frame by my bed. This apparition of normality calms me slightly, but I am still shaking, and my head is thumping. I stagger to the bathroom to wash my clammy hands and splash my face with cold water. There, I do a double take at my reflection in the mirror. Winding all around my throat is a narrow ribbon of furious reddish-purple bruising. Incredulous, I bring up my hand to touch my damaged skin and wince. I notice my fingers. There is blood. An unpleasantly sticky mass of bloody gunge clogged underneath the nails. I suddenly feel extremely faint. Then, just as I am about to turn on the cold water tap, I freeze in dread. An icy snake of terror slithers up my spine as I become aware of a malevolent presence. I perceive a shadow in the far corner of the bathroom. It is the big man, here in my bathroom. He is crouching beside our shower in much the same position as he was on the balcony earlier, and he is smirking at me. There are now 3 angry-looking score marks running from his left ear to his nose. Terror-stricken, I back out of the bathroom and run. I struggle and scrabble with the latch to open the door to the garden, only to find it is not our garden. I find myself in a thick forest of some weird kind of bamboo plant whose tips tower high above me, entwining themselves into a messy vegetal rooftop, drowning out the sunlight. I have to breathe in to squeeze between the smooth, gigantic trunks, each one easily the size of a man's thigh. It is as if I am moving in slow motion, and the big man's insane laughter continues to echo all around me. As I try to advance further, I become more and more entangled in this impenetrable green prison. My legs are now totally enmeshed in a cluster of smaller shoots, hundreds of fine tendrils entwined around my shins. I am trapped, unable to move another inch. Help me! I scream. Help me, somebody, please. I'm stuck. I jerk bolt upright, the bed sheet coiled tightly round my legs. Well, I suppose that explains me feeling trapped. I attempt to reason. But wait, why is my heart still pounding like that? I notice the door handle beginning to move, and with a sense of foreboding, I become aware of the big man's threatening presence once again. No, please, no, this can't really be happening. Please tell me it can't. Ah! I try to take flight, but my legs refuse to obey. Thunderous laughter erupts all around, coming closer, getting louder. The intense pressure on my eardrums is too painful. My bedroom door is opening. Here we go again. A couple of seconds pass when I hear the sound again. A sound almost like screaming. My eyes lock with Maki's for a split second before he takes off. With a curse, we quickly follow him. The screams are getting closer and louder. Ain. Maki shouts loudly. Maki, she shouts in return, her voice right next to us. Gah. Don't you guys hear now? No, I'm down from horror. Suddenly, Gareth goes down as something collides with him. He groans as he lands on the ground with a thud. I quickly shine my light, revealing Gareth's pain-filled face and Ain's frightened one. Ain! Maki shouts, going towards her. He gathers her in his arms as sobs rock her frame. Leaves and twigs stick out of her wet hair. Mud and blood cake her pale face. There is a bleeding gash on her forehead, and small cuts litter her skin. Her clothes are torn, bloodied, and drenched in water. Ein? Are you okay? Did Callie do this to you? Maki asks frantically. She shakes her head, her body still trembling. And no, Callie didn't do this. She stutters out. I take off my jacket and wrap it around her shoulders. We have to get out of here. She tries to stand up, but her shaking legs force her back down again. Take it easy, Maki says. She grabs his arms in a fierce grip. We have to leave right now, she growls out. Her voice has stopped shaking. It's coming. Ein, what are you talking about? What happened to you? They're real. The Neki, they're real. She tells us. The last part a whisper. They can't be. It's a store. Maki replies. It killed Callie. She interrupts, casting us into silence. Dragged him into the lake, kicking and screaming, and tore him apart. She pulls down the collar of her shirt, revealing a deep bite mark that definitely does not look human. It almost got me, but I got away somehow. I look at Ein, not quite believing my ears. The story my mother always told me. Darren was real. Suddenly, an inhuman screech fills the air, causing us all to freeze. More screeches fill the air and are steadily growing in volume. It's coming, Ein whispers, her pale blue eyes widening in fear. I quickly help her stand. The screech is getting closer. Run! I shout. I grab Ein's hand and head in the opposite direction that she came from. Mikey and Gareth right behind us. Bushes and low branches cut into my skin, but I pay them no mind, focused only on getting out of the woods. This can't be happening. This cannot be happening. I hear Gareth state in a breathless voice. We just have to make it out of the woods. I tell him when suddenly the screeching is right beside us. Before I can say anything, a black mass rushes at me, knocking me down. I feel pain as my body hits the ground. I'm disoriented first, but my vision clears, revealing sharp teeth coming towards my face. I quickly kick my feet out, sending it away from me. Grabbing the closest thing to me, a thick stick, I scramble to my feet. The Neki has taken the shape of a beautiful, naked woman. Its hair is long, white, and drags upon the ground. Blood stains its pale skin, and its eyes are black as night. It flicks its attention between the four of us, as if deciding who to go after first. The dark orbs settle on Ein, and a cruel smile stretches across its face. With fingers clawed, it races towards her. I use the stick and smack the Neki across the face. Before it can get its bearing, I hit it again, forcing it back. I go to hit it once more, when it grabs the end of the stick and rips it out of my hand. It then wraps its hand around my throat, lifting me into the air. I try to pry its hand off, but it is too strong. I hear Maki shout as he runs towards us with a stick of his own. The Neki easily knocks him away, and brings its other towards my left arm. It takes my arm and brings it towards its mouth. I try to resist. Suddenly there is pain shooting up my arm as the creature takes a bite. My scream fills my ears in the air. Taking its mouth away, the Neki looks at me with a blood-stained grin. Then it goes for my shoulder. Its sharp teeth tears into my skin. The pain is absolutely excruciating, and I can feel it through my entire body. My body is weakening and black spots fill my vision as it continues to feed from my flesh. The shouts of my friends echo in the background, but I know it's useless. I am going to die tonight. All I can think about is my mother, and the fact that she will be heartbroken. I'm sorry I didn't keep my promise, 80. I think as I start to fade out. Suddenly, the teeth and pressure around my throat are lifted. As I fall to the ground, I gasp and cough as air rushing back into my lungs. A screech fills the air once again, but this one is filled with pain. Still weak, I can only lift my head a bit to see. Another screech reaches my ears, even louder and longer than the last. The necky is on the ground with several arrows sticking out of it. Still screeching, it tries to crawl away, but another arrow finds it. This time, piercing what I believe to be its heart, causing it to go quiet. A sense of peace fills me at the creature's silence. I may be dying, but at the very least my friends will be okay. As I begin to black out, familiar emerald green eyes lock onto my own. The smell of lilac fills my nose and soft hands caress my face. A-T-D-dot, I whisper. I see a small smile settle on her face. Olin Pahoalani, she states softly, tears running down her face. I told you to stay out of the woods. I know. I'm sorry. I tell her. Rest, she says. I close my eyes and surrender to the darkness. It was a trite scenario. Something so overdone that it managed to be both boring and ostentatious at the same time. The middle of a road leading to two opposite places, the forest or the hills. What'll it be? High sun over the hills or shadows dancing in the forest? Whistle of sharp wind grazing the peaks of the hills or two-bit chainsaw echoes within the forest? What'll it be? Elevation or seclusion? A higher grace or a darker enigma? What path will lead you to your best self? Your best life? What'll it be? What a crock. It wasn't a magic sign. It wasn't some metaphor for life. No, that's just how it went when you found yourself all by your lonesome in a valley. You were always in the middle of two things. Two landscapes, two temperatures, two clouds, two sounds. Sounds were like mosquitoes, buzzing loud and quick, leaving no trace of where they actually landed until they'd already ripped into your skin and left behind itching, burning poison. Keller leaned against the hot metal of the Cadillac, gazing out into the dull sky and brooding over this. Valleys were a lot like hollers. Keller had grown up in dirt-poor hollers clear across the country from where she stood now. All in all, valleys and hollers were just drop-offs, wannabe holes dragging down the earth, confusing anyone's senses who entered. Whether it was Virginia where Keller had come into the world, or Idaho where she was now, it didn't make a difference. Two-stroke chainsaw, magnifying in volume beyond those dying pines. Keller hated that bladed monster just about as much as she hated valleys and hollers and the never-ending two different ways to go scenario she kept finding herself in. An alarm beeped twice, faint, from her hand. She looked down to see the 1% keeping hold on her cell phones. Life fade out completely. Black screen. Black mirror showcasing a new, tiny reflection of Keller's face. She looked as tired and moody as she felt. The air got quiet then. No more chainsaw. Relief flooded through Keller, and she slowly got back into the car, wiggling uncomfortably behind the giant steering wheel. A little natural noise she didn't mind, but human-made sounds were always unnerving, especially when you couldn't immediately see the source. Dead silence wasn't a welcome song either, as it usually signaled only one of two things: the aftermath of something terrible or the waiting for it. Keller put the old, beautiful heap of automobile into gear and pulled onto the hot tarmac, relishing in the blowing dead air that posed as the 1977 Eldorado's AC. Maybe she was just being sensitive and dramatic about the whole dreaded sounds that, after all, She had used both sound and silence to her advantage less than 48 hours earlier when she'd killed Andy. She'd stalked him quietly for weeks before, and truly thought the murder itself would be carried out just as quietly. But Keller hadn't banked on Andy killing her best friend in the moments before it was his time to die. Homicide is a fickle thing. Anyone who's ever watched a true crime documentary or a slasher movie knows this. Keller couldn't for the life of her understand why she'd thought it would be any different in her own situation. The whole point of killing Andy was to get him the hell out of his wife's life before she was the murdered one. Andy's wife, Malin. Keller's best friend, Malin. The well-renowned former astronaut scientist Malin, who had a beautiful line of accolades following her everywhere she went. When people said her name, Malin Boudreau, they corresponded it with all those insurmountable brilliant achievements and skills. No one ever said Malin Boudreau, beaten and battered wife of a real loser. Keller clutched at the cracked leather that wrapped the steering wheel, enjoying the way the frayed strands prickled her clammy hands. She clenched her teeth together, stared straight ahead as she drove towards her decided path in that moment, up to the forest. Anything remote was welcome. Any old forgotten place would do for Andy's chopped-up corpse. She was ready to dump him off already, get him as far away from Malin as she could finally. Keller swallowed down bile back into her gas station, coffee-coated stomach for the millionth time since she'd started this wild drive. She didn't give two shits about dead Andy. Nah, that didn't make her nervous one bit. It was what she had to do after. Doing right by Malin, respectfully giving her the send-off she deserved. Malin Boudreau, the one-of-a-kind, too good to be true human in this world that everyone marveled after. That's how she had to be remembered. That's why Keller had to bring her along on Andy's disappearing act. That's why the world would never know what a monster Andy truly had been. No justice would exist because the truth wouldn't. Malin didn't deserve to be dragged down with her torturer. Keller scoffed at herself. She was no martyr, no greatest, all-sacrificing best friend here. She wasn't going to kid herself that she was as good of a person as Malin had been. Hell, if Keller hadn't run off to the big city to escape the wretched Virginia holler in the first place, maybe none of this would have ever happened. But she'd abandoned her best friend, left the person she'd grown up with when she had needed Keller the most. No, Keller wasn't looking for her own laurels. Killing Andy, preserving a golden legacy for dead Malin, was the least she could do for turning her back on a shitshow that had become a bloodbath. Well, originally there wasn't supposed to be any bloodbath. Malin would have been proud of Keller's nerve. She'd chosen a symbolic way to take Andy out. Something almost poetic. Loss of complete will, complete power. Keller hadn't totally thought the idea up herself, though. Fate had intervened casually on the television one Tuesday afternoon in the background, as Keller had waited on her Starbucks order at the counter. Scopolamine, a seemingly innocuous drug for motion sickness, could be rendered a most dangerous poison if an overdose was administered, turning the receiver into something of a literal zombie. A weird numbing of the brain that brought upon lack of will and a bot mental state in which the overdosed party would do whatever he or she was told. The television at the Manhattan Starbucks was circling through the daily news, and a brief story ran about a man who had used scopolamine to aid in killing his wife. The details on how this man had actually done the murder itself hadn't mattered to Keller, because the beautiful thing about this scopolamine was that Keller would be able to choose whatever happened next. It was a godlike power that Keller could exercise, giving the necessity of what she would have to do deliciously satisfying in its own way. And boy, had it been. Keller smiled in spite of herself as she reminisced killing Andy, temporarily fogging away from the slow drive she was making up the valley and towards the forest. The perfect accessory to murder would lend itself in the form of a lactose-unfriendly casserole. There was always this weird, cheese-laden corn casserole in the fridge at Andy and Milan's house. It was Andy's favorite food, and a broken nose or busted-up clavicle might ensue upon Malin if that Frigidaire was ever vacant of a giant glass baking dish of it. Keller had a key to the house. Another perfect accessory. She'd had it for years. Malin asked her not to tell Andy, so he never knew. Everything was easy. Getting into the house, poisoning the casserole, which had been fresh, by the way, watching it all unfold through the overgrown hedges by the back window. Easy. Andy and Malin lived on a sprawling 10-acre lot, so neighbors' witnesses were not an issue. It took less than half an hour for the drugs to hit Andy full force. He was at the bottom of the staircase when Keller walked inside. She remembered looking down at him for a good 60 seconds, studying the way his limp body rested at an odd position on the stairs. His ass plastered at the very bottom, and his head 3 steps up. Andy was a big guy, tall, stocky, making it all the more cartoonish of a scene. The chainsaw was revving up again, but it was louder this time, and it was right next to Keller. She slammed on the brakes and whipped her head around to look at the empty passenger side of the car. Only, it wasn't empty. She muttered, the most offensive, albeit creative, expletives to the fresh, unexpected specter, now sitting beside her in the passenger seat. Buckled up and holding a vibrating chainsaw was Malin. She stared down at that chainsaw in her hand, smiling slightly at the rapidly gyrating belt. And then, just as quickly as the chainsaw had revved, it disappeared from Malin's hands, and she looked over at Keller, her long blonde hair swinging over her small shoulders. Malin didn't say anything. Neither did Keller. What was there for Keller to say? Why, the hell are you? Why are you here? Your dead body is in the trunk of this classic peach clunker, so I know you're just a figment of my murdering imagination. How's heaven? Or hell? Or why the fuck do you have a chainsaw, Malin? Keller looked ahead out the front window. She moved her foot from the brake to the gas and turned the steering wheel just enough to pull the Cadillac out of the road and onto the weed-covered shoulder. She put it in park, looked over at the passenger's side seat again, expecting to find it empty. It wasn't. Malin was still there, glistening barrel eyes like she was about to cry. Malin had always been a crier. Total opposite of Keller, who that used to joke didn't have tear ducts. This wasn't real. Keller wasn't so delusional. Yet, there was an almost annoying symbolism in everything. The along-for-the-ride apparition, Malin opened her mouth to speak. No words came out. But Keller didn't need words. She knew the disappearing chainsaw had been a direct allude to what she'd had to use to dismember Andy, so that she could fit 2 bodies and corresponding evidence, i.e. a big-ass suitcase packed for a fake leave-it-all-behind scenario, in the trunk. The sound of the 2-bit coming from God knows what direction from earlier. Not real. Another mirage of sound. Keller looked away from Malin at her surroundings outside the car. She was thankful for a faux chainsaw. It meant the forest was as deserted and alone as it looked. No humans. Hopefully animals to devour Andy, but no actual creatures that could use a phone to call the cops. Keller caught a glimpse of an especially thick area of brush and trees and overgrown goodness. She stared at it for a moment, then turned the car off. This is where she'd dispose of Andy. The sky was undeciding and bleak as ever, but it had grown darker, so Keller assumed it must be nearing late evening. Between her dead cell phone and even more kaput car clock, she couldn't be sure. Keller got out of the Cadillac, walked around it, walked up the road a bit, walked back. No one was around. It was safe. And it was time. Keller had thought about going full Breaking Bad and just sloshing Andy's body in a vat of muriatic acid so she wouldn't have to dispose of anything. She also wondered if today's serial murderers used pop culture TV as much as she had with this killing. It was inevitable, right? But just securing the scopolamine alone was enough risk for Keller. That meant muriatic acid was out. So now here she was, about to dig a 9-foot hole. Not a 6, a 9, maybe an 11, if the last cup of coffee kicked in at the right time, and she was only going to throw some bits of Andy in it. Then she would dirt it back up. Then she'd do it all over again, perhaps 5 more times. 9-foot holes were nothing in the scheme of things. The bigger picture was successfully hiding a monster forever, so that everyone back in Virginia would always believe the note Keller had left behind, the one that would be presumed to be in Malin and Andy's words. There was no dispute about the time of day. It was once Keller was finished hours and hours later. It was dark out, nearly pitch black, except for an eerie moon right out of a horror film. When she walked back to the car, breathless, but surprisingly barely dirty, another quip out of a horror film greeted her. 2 crows on the hood of the caddy. Crows. Keller found this curious, not unnerving. Maybe because she realized in that second that she'd never actually seen a crow in person before. She closed her eyes, shook her head, opened them again. The crows were gone, and Keller smirked knowingly. Just another figment of her imagination brought on by all this bullshit traumatic mess. Her brain really was taking her for a ride today. Keller got back into the car, breathing a bit easier, but now faced with 2 ways to go, as usual. Ghost Malin was in the passenger seat again. No chainsaw this time. That was nice. Keller turned the key in the ignition, glancing down at the black screen of her cell phone that rested on the center console. She didn't know why. Of course, it would still be dead. She looked up at the rearview mirror, straightened it, and threw the car around suddenly, nearly taking it on 2 wheels, and leaving a deafening screech on the pavement as she headed back in the direction she'd come. The way of the hills this time. And despite the phantom just to her right, Keller found her mind wandering off again within seconds. Standing over Andy's drugged-up state on the stairs hadn't brought upon any hesitation in finishing the job, but Keller had found herself wanting to just stand there and stare down at him forever. The tyrant had become the helpless victim. Oh, what a beautiful scene. When Keller had finally snapped out of her own trance, she'd kicked Andy in his side until he came to. His eyes were glazed over like a pair of hot, drippy donuts, but he was still mobile, and Keller had leaned down, clutched at his arm, and directed him to stand up. She tugged with all her might. Keller was stronger than most women her age, not because of a size advantage, but because she was a lifetime athlete. Along with Andy complying and shakily pushing himself off the stairs, Keller was able to get him to his feet. She gave him another order to walk to the back door of the house and out to the shed, while Keller followed behind him. Andy wordlessly did exactly that, though his lopsided trudging was so slow that it truly was reminiscent of a nearly forgotten 1950s inflated zombie culture. Keller had her hand grasped around the handgun in her purse, just in case, but they made it all the way out to the backyard shed with no resistance. Andy didn't even act like he was cognizant of who Keller was, or himself, for that matter. They went into the shed, and she directed him to stand with his back against the far wall. He had done so, still donut-eyed, staring at her with no realization that he was doing so. This is when Keller had hesitated. She had wanted to make Andy suffer. She'd been this salivating sort of angry for the last 2 months, since the last straw had commenced and Keller had finally decided to end Andy. She'd shown up as a surprise for a weekend visit to Malin, knowing Andy would be away on a business trip to leave the two old friends by themselves. It had been years since they'd seen one another in person. Keller had walked into a darkened home, a surprised Malin at the kitchen table. A Malin who was absolutely unrecognizable to Keller. Between her swollen-up face, to black and blue chest, to the casts on both her left arm and right foot, there was no question in Keller's mind who had done this. Malin may have refused to admit it or talk much about it, but Keller didn't need any confirmation from her. She was going to save her friend who couldn't find the strength to do it herself. She owed Malin that much after abandoning her 5 years earlier. Keller would finally be the one to give Malin her life back before Andy had the chance to wipe it out. But standing in front of this version of Andy, the one who'd been stripped of all his will, Keller had suddenly wondered which magic weapon that jingled around in her oversized purse would be best to use to kill Andy. The gun or the Drano? At this point, he probably wouldn't feel a damn ounce of pain, so shouldn't she go with the least messy? Yes. So, that's exactly what she had done, though one more satisfaction was owed to her. He would do it himself. She had handed Andy the bottle of poison and commanded him to drink it. He tipped his head back, swaying so suddenly that he nearly fell over, and drained the entire little vial down his throat. When he was dead, not even an hour later, Keller had gone back into the house to leave the typed note she'd constructed to Malin from Andy. The one she'd originally planned to use that in no way had involved Malin. The one that was a fake Andy telling Malin that he was leaving her forever. Malin would never know the truth about what had happened here. Keller would never have her burden that. But something had been off in the house. As Keller had walked towards Malin and Andy's bedroom to leave the note there, a strong smell hit her out of nowhere. Rusty, chemical, violent. Dot. She remembered pushing open the door and falling to her knees in the kind of despair you only see in the movies that get nominated for Oscars. Malin was dead. Andy had murdered her right before Keller had arrived with her diabolical plan. But Keller couldn't see it. It was like her memory was forbidding her from reliving the trauma of discovering Malin's dead body, blacking her out. Even after 2 days in the bright-hued El Dorado, driving across the country, being inside her own head deeper than ever before. That moment, that memory, it was lost to Keller. Keller sucked in her breath and abruptly halted the car, her eyes nearly bulging out of their sockets at the sudden sight before her. Children, teenagers, families, a whole gaggle of them crossed the road in front of the Cadillac, some of the parents throwing a glare at Keller for almost running into them. Keller's eyes moved past the people, and an amalgam of colors whirled in front of her. A carnival. Keller rolled down the window just slightly, and all the senses came through. Music that was too loud and funnel cakes that smelled so good you'd want to eat them until you threw up. The carnival. A magical fountain of youth place. The place where Keller had first met Malin decades ago when they were just 11 years old. There was an unexpected, loud squeaking noise that cut through the night, and Keller's gaze followed it. An old Ferris wheel. Identical to the one from all those years ago, at the carnival where two best friends had first encountered one another. And then Keller realized something as her eyes darted around to take in the rest of the show. All of it seemed exactly the same as that carnival before. Keller realized something else then. Her breathing was shallow, suddenly coming in sharp, painful gasps. She squeezed the steering wheel so tight that she was sure her knuckles would burst through the skin. She rested her head on the wheel, tried to understand what was happening. She couldn't breathe. Why couldn't she fucking breathe? Keller's eyes involuntarily crossed. Her eyelids were heavy. She couldn't keep them open any longer. She gasped for breath that just wasn't coming, clenched at her throat, clawed at it. Her eyes were tightly closed now, anvils on the end of her lashes. A bird made a harsh sound nearby. A caw. No. Ow. A crow. Keller didn't know how much time had passed, or why the horn of the caddy wasn't blaring, since she could only assume that she was passed out on it. But Keller's eyes lost the weight, and as her eyelashes fluttered back open, she realized she wasn't hunched over the steering wheel at all. She was lying flat on her back. No. No. What was happening? She internally screamed at herself to snap out of it. She was carrying out an atrocious crime. She had to get Malin's remains to northern Idaho, to the little town that was Malin's favorite place in all the world. That little town they'd come upon one summer on a random backpacking excursion. They'd been 18. It was just 6 months before Malin would meet Andy the monster. It had turned out to be Keller and Malin's last trip together. 18 years old, and wild and free, and at the mercy to the magic that is to be young. No. Keller didn't have time for the reminiscing or the sadness of losing Malin. She had to keep moving. Morning would have to come after it was all done. It would have to come after. Keller's hair was wet. So were the smells surrounding her. Grass. Keller looked up into a clear night sky. Tons of stars. No moon anymore. She tried to move her head. Nothing. Tried to wiggle her fingers. Nothing. Of course. She was in a delusion. A dream. Her mouth hung open. She could hear the wheezing. She could taste blood. A cell phone beeped its low battery alert from somewhere in the distance, closer than the crow's song. That was impossible. Keller didn't have a phone charger in the El Dorado, and her cell had been dead for hours. A familiar silhouette leaned over Keller, looked down on her. Long blonde hair framing, almost hiding. The face of this woman. Something was in each of her hands. A rag. A buck knife. Something was in each of her eyes, too. Betrayal. Keller made the motion to reach up, but she still couldn't move. She tried to call out to the shadow, to Malin, through her pulsating breaths. She couldn't do that either. Keller closed her eyes, tried to will herself out of this nightmare and back to reality. She went somewhere else then, but not to the stopped car in front of the carnival amongst the hills. Keller was in the doorway of Malin's bedroom, fresh off killing Andy. She was on her knees, waving her hands out in front of her frantically, trying to grab hold of the crown molding, the door handle, anything. She was fading, the chemically soaked rag pressed against her mouth and nose, liquid dripping down her chin. She swayed, crumpled to the shiny travertine floor. Malin was crouched down, smiling and shaking her head, rag in hand, blonde hair framing her pretty face, whips of slashes by blade through the air, striking the flesh of Keller's hands and arms and wrists, slicing into the tendons of her legs, the muscles of her stomach. And then everything went black. Keller coughed and sputtered and choked, her body heaving up in resistance every now and then as she traveled further and further away from existing. She could hear Malin's voice, full of cunning and sadness and satisfaction all at once. A strange mixture of emotions, a hard one to understand. Words from Malin's lips came from up above, strung together, yet grossly disjointed. I'm sorry, but had this coming. You don't know anything. My truth. Your truth. The truth. You left me. 5 years is a long time. You did this to yourself, Keller. Keller opened her eyes again. Outside. The backyard. Malin was on her knees in the grass beside Keller now. Her cream blouse was covered in crimson. They were only mere yards from the shed. From Andy's body, Keller opened her mouth, tried to speak again, tried to explain herself to Malin, tried to apologize, to yell, to scream, anything. But sounds became so reticent, so superfluous. Even her dying breaths were almost inaudible. Keller's eyes wandered weakly, stopped on movement on the roof of the shed. 2 crows. There had never been a second note left behind in the fake words of Malin and Andy, proclaiming that they were leaving town forever. There had never been a frantic packing of a suitcase, or chopping up Andy with a chainsaw from the shed. No discreetly shoving it all in the trunk of the Eldorado. Keller was taken over then by a heave in her chest, and a vignette slowly rolled inwards until everything was nothing. Dark dot. Silent. Vibration in Keller's hand. She opened her eyes and looked down. Her cell phone was coming to life, the screen blinking and portraying the caller ID image of Malin from their college years. Keller lifted her gaze and looked around. A clear night sky sprinkled with stars. No moon. An amalgam of colors whirled in front of her, along with music that was too loud, and funnel cakes that smelled so good, you'd want to eat them until you threw up. Clumps of crowds walking past Keller, bustling to the corn dog stands or the next kitschy amusement ride. Something touched Keller's arm, and when she looked over, the cell phone in Keller's hand had stopped vibrating. Malin stood there, beaming. Malin pointed up to the slowly rotating Ferris wheel, just as it made a loud squeaking noise. They looked up at it, then back at each other and laughed. Keller's gaze moved to the land beyond the carnival. Flat, easy, heading towards a bridge that offered one way in and one way out. Easy. Keller glanced back down at her cell phone, up to the Ferris wheel, and then her eyes landed on Malin again. Keller held up the car keys and motioned towards the big peach clunker waiting for them at the edge of the bright lights. Malin nodded and looped her arm in Keller's. Just the 2 of them. No one left to blame. Could you imagine living in a world without colors? It would be like eating food without any flavor. Sure, you can get by on it, but why would you want to? It's a bland, boring, purposeless existence, suitable for animals, but not for humans. Humans need something more. Humans need spice in their lives. That, my friend, is why we turn to art. Before I found art, my life was utterly unbearable. I was an animal in human form, seeing in monochrome and eating grass. No point to any of it, except prolonging my meaningless existence. The need, though, the need for more was still there. Like most other people, I was missing something vital. Do you know what I mean? All right, don't try to answer that. Here's the real challenge, though. It's hard to find something when you don't really know what it is that you're looking for. We all go through life looking for the missing piece that will fill our emptiness. But many of us never find it. So it was for me. I tried filling the hole with money, sex, alcohol, drugs. All any of it did was increase my hunger. I could find no real joy in anything. It was a pitiful state, and I'd still be trapped in it if were not for art. I was lucky, you see. Unlike most people, I tripped over my missing piece while I was stumbling around in the dark. It'd taken me completely by surprise, but when it happened, there could be no doubt about what it was that I'd found. I had found him, and with him, I'd found my purpose. I'll bet you're starting to think I'm crazy. Just listen. I'll do my best to explain. Though it was over a decade ago, I can still remember that day clearly. It was back when I was in college and I'd been up late in the library, trying fruitlessly to cram for a test I cared nothing about. I was walking back to my spot with an armload of books when I noticed an ancient-looking newspaper laid out on one of the tables. My curiosity piqued. I stopped to examine it and was awestruck by the photo on the front page. I don't remember the headline, perhaps I'd never read it. I hadn't needed to. What I was staring at was a glorious work of art, the magnum opus of a great mind. The genius of it, the arrangement of the piece, the expression captured on his subject's face, the perfect placement of every masterful stroke. It all harmonized together into a symphony of beautiful humanity that played through my mind. They're just errant words to truly do it justice. As incredible as it was seeing the piece through the black and white photograph, though I knew that it was only a shadow of the real thing. An element was missing, something essential. Without it, the work was incomplete. I had to see the real thing. So I sought out the master who had created it. Not in a literal sense, you understand. Cruel fate had decreed long ago that we would never be able to meet in person, nor would I be able to lay my eyes upon his original work. It had been destroyed long ago, along with its creator, by self-righteous men incapable of understanding. What, though, I ask you, is a meeting of two people besides an exchange of information? We exchange our names, our hobbies, our likes, our dislikes, our experiences, and numerous other bits of trivial data that eventually add up, allowing us to know each other. Could not that same data be obtained without a meeting? Could I not learn who he had been and what had made him tick by having a conversation of sorts with his memory? And once I knew who he was, would I not be the most qualified to carry on his neglected legacy? To that end, I greedily devoured every scrap of information I could find about him, even as starving men gobble up the smallest morsels of food with gusto. Anything that would contribute to an ever clearer picture of who he was. I found every little bit of it endlessly satisfying, and there was plenty to find. Newspapers, books, documentaries. He had left his indelible mark on the world. I squeezed each source like an orange for every drop of juice it would yield, and eventually I found that I knew him better than I even knew myself. I was ready to continue his work. The first challenge was to obtain my tools. What is a painter without a brush? A potter without his wheel? You may be surprised to learn how expensive an undertaking art can be, especially when all of us artists are supposedly starving, as they say, but we somehow manage. A true artist will do anything for their craft. I dropped out of college, got a job, and acquired my workshop piece by piece. My next challenge was in finding suitable subjects for my pieces. I was surprised to discover that it was difficult to find people who were willing. Most people were strangely resistant to the idea of being a subject for my art, and given my complete lack of experience, I really couldn't blame them. After all, who wants to be immortalized in art that isn't good? As I said though, an artist will do anything for their craft, and soon I was having no trouble finding subjects. With practice, I slowly became a master in my own right, and, in the back of my mind, I had him there to guide me every step of the way. It was as though he were speaking to me, working through me. He influenced every decision, every movement I made. Pose the subject like this. Turn their head like this. Wait until they have the right expression. There it is. He told me where to draw my lines, how to let the colors burst out from where they were trapped within the unremarkable canvas. Such beautiful colors. Whites and pinks, yellows and browns, blues and purples, all of it coming together in a bouquet of indescribable beauty. Of these colors, my favorite has always been red, the color of passion, the color of sacrifice, the color of life. With each line, I drew it gushed out readily, eager to show off its brilliance in the light. It spread outward from the subject, sainting them within a ruby halo. You are growing restless, I see. Sit tight, I'm almost finished. I just want to help you understand. After I complete every piece of art, when I gaze upon what I created, I feel what my master must have felt all those decades ago, as he looked down at his own work. There is truly nothing like it, seeing a masterpiece that you have created with your own two hands. It was Emerson, wasn't it, who said, "To be great is to be misunderstood." Well, my master had been misunderstood in his time, as I'm misunderstood in ours. But he never let it stop him from trying to help others to understand. I will not allow it to stop me either. I keep working, because somewhere out there in the world, perhaps now, or maybe 100 years from now, there may be another who beholds my art and sees what I see. Who sees what my mentor saw? Perhaps it will give their life purpose as it did mine. Well, anyway, that's all of it. Are you ready? No. Hush. Hush now. You're afraid, but that's natural. It's just because you don't understand. Stop struggling like that. You're going to bruise your skin. Patience. Give me a moment to sharpen my tools, and then we'll get started. A little bit of fear and some pain, but it will all be worth it, I promise. I'm going to make you immortal. December 16th, 2011. 1:48 a.m. There is no rest for me tonight. Outside, the wind howls with yet another winter storm. Here, in this remote cabin, the university has so graciously afforded me. I find the gale closely resembles the sound of a woman screaming. It is maddening to toss and turn like I have, so preoccupied with falling asleep that the effort itself is what is keeping me awake. So I return to these pages once more, a man half crazed with exhaustion, yet the impulse to record these musings jolts the energy to my bones that is so strangely absent during waking hours. This morning I found a new set of tracks going past my front door. Closer inspection indicated it was a quadrupedal creature and traveling fast. I couldn't help but wonder if the animal had survived the night. This wilderness was like none other I have studied in before, being so barren and cold and dark. To my knowledge, the only predators out here are bears and wolves, the former of which should be hibernating. Photos were taken, observations noted and uploaded accordingly. My venture into the surrounding woods had been fruitful as well. The subtle signs of life had whispered all around me, bracing themselves for the coming storm. The piney branches reaching heavenward, gathering what sunlight they could. The bark of the aspen, stripped repeatedly by what was likely a herd of deer. The shrill call of a hawk, circling patiently as it sought out its dinner. The wonder of nature, even in the dead of winter. It seems the world never truly sleeps. My own dinner had been a heated can of chili and several pieces of French bread, smothered in butter. The supplies come every 2 weeks, and I am learning how to ration them without allowing the fresh produce to go to waste. I suppose in a way I should be grateful for this solitude, for this chance to study over the holiday break, so that I may record and publish my findings in next semester's journal. Even so, it can get eerie at times, especially when I cannot sleep. Before making another futile attempt at slumber, I feel the need to record one puzzling aspect of today's trek, as I am certain it will fade from my memory in time. Upon my return just before sunset, I found what looked to be initials carved into an aspen tree not more than 20 yards from my front door. I am positive it was not there when I first left. The sloppy letters resembling an M&E were just about the size of my hand, and surely I would have noticed when I first headed out. Either that or I was so preoccupied with the journey to come that I simply passed right by it. I could see the letters when I turned to look from my front door. Bizarre, but intriguing. Perhaps I have a neighbor. December 18th, 2011, 11:17 p.m. The storm lasted straight through the past 2 days, making any travel impossible. Outside my window, it has been nothing but a wash of white. The world gone quiet, blank as canvas. I have attempted to head to bed early, but to no avail. Being cooped up within these four walls has not done me any favors, I'm sure. My body is restless, but my mind entirely preoccupied with my lack of progress, the halt of my work, and a single streak upon my only window. I had discovered it upon waking this morning, and this must be the isolation. I have been fascinated by it all day. The window adjacent to my front door had a line drawn in the frost down its dead center, about a foot in length, as if someone had pressed their finger to the icy glass outside and swiped downward. It brought dim recollections of me doing this as a child, except I would draw stick figures or write my name. Did someone come up to my window? I have tried to make reasonable assumptions. Perhaps a chunk of snow had fallen from the roof and grazed the glass on its way down. Or maybe the wild wind had blown something against my window, and I just hadn't noticed. But a quick assessment had proved neither of these things were possible, as the snow beneath the pane was as smooth as the landscape. White, white. No pile of dislodged snow. No foreign object laying atop the powder. I have settled on the likelihood that whatever it was is buried beneath the drifts, as the accumulation has been swift and steady while the storm rages on. I stay awake tonight now wondering, what else may the snow have hidden? December 19th, 2011, 2:17 a.m. A snowman. These writings are becoming a habit of mine now. I'm not sure why, but I feel most inclined to pen my thoughts as the night slips into the wee hours of the morning. This night, I am more justified in it. I think, after the events of this morning, I was gladdened to see that the storm had finally abated upon waking, and so I had made a foolhardy effort to shovel what path I could outside my front door. The process was slow going, and I was so preoccupied with my task, I had failed to notice the latest addition to my wintry landscape. I had thought, at first I was hallucinating, that the sunlight's glare against the snow was hindering my vision. But no. Situated just by the tree that bore the mysterious initials was a snowman facing my small dwelling. The sight of it, and even thinking of it now, makes my heart drop. Someone is out here in this wilderness with me. Someone who no doubt finds these small intrusions on my privacy quite entertaining. Even now, I cannot make sense of it. There are no neighborhoods nearby, no cities, no easy means of transport. My study on the habitats of local Alaskan wildlife had deemed it necessary that I would be placed quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The possibility of campers in this wild land at this time of the year simply did not seem possible. I have decided the most likely culprits are my home-based team back in Anchorage, who ensure my supplies will be delivered to me. I cannot imagine why Mac or Leslie would think this is funny, but it's the only thing that makes any sense. They are the only other humans I know. For a fact, were out this way just a few days ago to drop off my latest load. I do not want to sit here and dwell on how this could be, where they're staying, or why. Why? I can barely sleep as it is. As soon as I saw the snowman grinning cheekily with his pebbled mouth, some powerful sort of rage had come over me, and I had barreled through the snow just to knock his head off. If Leslie or Mac think this is funny, well, the department head will be hearing about this. They never struck me as so unprofessional. From where I sit now, I can just make out my newly decapitated friend. It seems silly, but I feel a sense of satisfaction that I had gotten them back, as petty as it is. Maybe now I'll be able to get some sleep. 11:11 a.m. It's back. I don't know how this is possible, but the damn thing is back. I woke late this morning, sleep deprived as I am, and went about my usual routine before heading outside to begin my hike into the nearby woods. And there it was, head back in place. I don't know how this happened. No one has been here. I'm sure of it this time, because there are no tracks in the snow. Let this record show that I didn't dream any of this. December 20th, 2011, 2:56 a.m. I will not be sleeping tonight. I am keeping guard with only my raging thoughts and endless cups of coffee to keep me company. Whoever is doing this is not going to be allowed to continue. I cannot sleep, cannot focus, cannot relax. Harmless prank or no. This is having a vast disadvantageous effect on my studies, and I will not allow it to go on. Even as I write this, I pause every few moments to glance out the window and ensure that damn snowman is not standing. I destroyed it earlier today, after I got back from my journey. A snowman cannot build itself, so I will sit here all night if I have to, until I catch the culprit in the act. I've given it some thought and realized that it would certainly be feasible for Mac, Leslie, or even Dimitri, maybe all three of them, to be camping out somewhere nearby. It's entirely possible, even in sub-zero temperatures. I've heard some of the locals do it with state-of-the-art and extremely expensive camping gear. Why they would go to such extremes is beyond me. And it's taking everything within me to not call the university first chance I get. There's only one thing I do not understand, though. The other instances, it was easy to trace back the lack of evidence to the storm and the consistent snowfall. For the life of me, I cannot figure how they did it this last time around without leaving any footprints. And in the middle of the night, too? Is that really how far they're willing to go for a stupid prank? God, I need some sleep. My mind is a jumbled mess. Once this is all figured out, I'm going to sleep for an entire day. December 22nd, 2011, 12:59 a.m. Every time I knock it down, it's back. It's back, and I never see or hear anything. I called the university today, finally fed up, and I was informed that Leslie had been out sick for a week, and Mac was visiting family for the holidays. Dimitri was accounted for too, though I had stopped listening when they told me that. Someone is out here. Someone is watching me, taunting me. The snowman stands guard no matter how many times I knock him down, so I've stopped trying. His daily resurrections have completely unnerved me, and I feel like I have to get out of here. But there's another storm here tonight, a big one, and I'm effectively trapped for the next few days. My studies have ceased. My mind and my cabin is a mess. I do not feel safe here. This journal has become my only solace. The wind is howling once more, and earlier tonight I could do little else but stare into the darkness, the breath coiled in my throat, waiting for the door to open or the window to shatter or some ghostly apparition to appear by my bedside. I wonder now if the isolation is driving me mad, if I am somehow imagining all of this. I have read up on and heard of such things happening before. The cold, the dark, the solitude. These things play tricks on our primate minds. And even in that vein, I cannot explain the fear I suddenly have. These pranks have been harmless, as unnerving as they are. They bear no real threat, and yet the eeriness of it has sunk into my bones, into my subconscious, so that even in the rare moments I finally fall asleep, it is all I dream about. Damn it all. I am afraid. December 25th, 2011, 12:00 a.m. I have seen something I cannot explain. It defies description, defies logic, defies all laws of God and man. God help me, I do not know what to do. The door is barricaded, and the storm has knocked out my power. It's circling around my cabin now, seeking a way in, and no doubt it will succeed. Oh God, the sounds it makes is like something from the gates of hell. Whoever finds this must know the truth of what is out here. Forget all that you have been told, because what I am seeing will haunt me to my dying breath. It's at my door. It's here. The photos and documentation are in my sweet baby, all fresh and pure. I see nothing sweeter than my babe before. I will hold you proudly till you can walk strong. Then my little babe will be gone, a strong man, and then this sweet mother will rejoice for so long. Aged arms caressed a soft child as the song was hummed with a raspy voice. The child slumbered as his mother slowly put him down into the crib. Sunlight streamed into the room, flooding the wooden rocking chairs, the body-size mirror, and the sleeping babe in a golden warmth. The woman, who had graying hair and soft facial features, walked slowly around the room, her white sundress flowing behind her. She had her right arm over her stomach, and her left elbow on top of that. Her hand reached up towards her mouth. 3 fingers were put on her lips, and the pinky and thumb crossed over the palm and touched softly. As she walked around, she touched each and every single toy that were on the small dressers. Smiling, she turned back to the crib and walked over gently. The babe was silent, still sleeping. Putting her 3 fingers on the baby's forehead, she rubbed them up to the top of his head. She was silent as she stared at this baby. This was her baby, her last one. Little Richard. She loved that name. That was the name of her firstborn, the one that had died when he was 2 months old. Since then, she had had 3 other children. Straightening, she turned and went out of the room. She grabbed a small book from the bookshelf in the hallway and headed towards the kitchen. Putting the book on the oak table, she sat down, the floorboards of the old home creaking. The room was dusty, and most of the kitchen was untouched, almost stuck in a time long ago. As she sat, her eyes washed over the room. Something in her stirred. Something didn't feel right. It was untouched. She remembered dusting it yesterday. She had dusted it yesterday, and swept the floor and scrubbed the cabinets. Shrugging it off, she opened the book, which was a photo album. Her mind was whisked away into the yellowing pictures before her. Smiling faces, birthday parties, and old pictures of the family covered the sticky pages that cracked and popped gently when they were turned. When they were turned, she looked at each one. One was of a young boy with blonde hair and big eyes. He had only a diaper on. She giggled, for this was her little Richard. The second child was a little young girl. She wore a little white dress and held a small teddy bear, little Anna. The woman frowned. Where was little Anna now? She didn't remember seeing her around. She turned to a different page, and another little girl smiled up at her. Little Emma. Again another frown, and again another child. This one was little Donald. As she turned the page again, her heart rate had started to race. Where were these kids? She stopped on a picture. A cold hand clenched her heart and let out a loud gasp. She pushed the book off the table and stood, her breathing becoming shallow. The photo album flopped to the ground with a sharp thud, the terrible picture lying face down in the dust that covered the floors. 2 police officers stood in this picture with body bags, and a woman who resembled too much of her was handcuffed, bloody and angry. Running towards the baby's room, she rushed in and darted for the crib. Grabbing the railing, she looked down only to let out a raspy scream. Instead of a baby was a thing of rotting flesh and vile-smelling decay. The mother felt her hands and body go numb. Shakily, she looked down at her hands. Dried blood covered every inch of them. Looking down, she eyed her clothing, which were covered with the crimson sin. She noticed more coming from the hallway. Frantically, she followed the bloody trail back into the kitchen. Her photo album still laid face down. But everything had changed. Dishes were all over the floor. The table was overturned. Fridge door was open, and 3 little children lay dead on the ground, bathing in crimson puddles. A knife lay within them. The mother tried to scream, but only an agonizing squeak came out. Shaking her head and waving her hands, she started to back up only to fumble and trip over something solid and stiff. Looking at it, fear filled her eyes. There she saw her own body lying, a gun in one hand and a note in the other. Shakily, she picked up the note and read it. The words of her sweet lullaby rang out like white noise. Throwing it down in fear, she jumped to her feet and rushed back to the baby's room. Throwing herself into the corner, she covered her face and sobbed. Rocking back and forth, she remembered. In her pain and agony, she remembered everything. She walked into the living room where her 3 children lied. They were watching Saturday morning cartoons. All morning she had been drinking, and her own self-control was lower than low today. She hadn't taken her medication yet. They angered her. She hadn't even showered. Water was always too hot. She hadn't done anything. Walking into the kitchen, she grabbed a plate and out of nowhere threw it on the ground. Looking around, her vision started to fade in and out. A shrill voice of a child cried out from the back of the house. This crying made her head hurt, and she wanted it to stop. She went down the hallway and into the baby's room. The baby screamed some more and squirmed around in the crib. That angered her even more. Looking around, she tried to find a way to make the baby stop. But finding nothing, she just stared at it. It screamed again and again, and then she lunged. She put her large hands around the child's neck and squeezed, yelling and begging for it to stop. After the child abruptly stopped, the mother backed away. The baby's mouth was covered in blood, and so were her hands. But that didn't stop her outrage. She ran down the hallway and into the kitchen, where she hastily had taken a knife from the drawer, its silver glinting in the dim light that shone through the window. Her other 3 children fumbled to their feet, letting out gasps of terror as their mother ran into the living room, her eyes wide and her knuckles white as she clenched the knife. She ran towards them, making them run to the kitchen in an attempt to get away from her. Unfortunately, she was able to grab Donald. He screamed and cried, but his mother took no heed to him and stabbed him in the chest 3 times. Blood squirted and landed on the wooden floor, turning the coppery brown to a velvety red. Her other children screamed and hid in a corner. Their mother stared at them, eyeing up each child. The TV was just a constant drone in the back of her mind as she pointed to Anna, beckoning for her to come. Anna shook her head and shrunk down further into the corner, praying that she'd disappear from this nightmare. Emma stared at her little brother's dead body. The mother got angry again and tried to demand her forward, her voice high and startling. This time Anna screamed, "No!" "Way!" The mother swore and lunged forward, throwing Emma out of the way and grabbing Anna, stabbing her 3 times. More blood squirted, landing all over the walls and onto Emma. Emma fell to the ground sobbing and crying, "Mommy, no! Please, no!" But of course, the mother grabbed Emma and stabbed her 3 times. The screaming hurt her head. After the blood had sprouted from her daughter's stomach, the mother raced around the kitchen, destroying everything in her rage. She flipped over the table and started to throw the dishes out of the cupboards. She opened the fridge and threw all the food around. After she had stopped, the mother looked around. She dropped the knife and sobbed herself. With loud gasps and moans of distress and anguish, She walked to her room where a gun was hidden in the top drawer of her dresser. Sitting on the bed, she cried and screamed, punching the mattress. After an hour or so of crying, she had grabbed the gun and had walked to the kitchen, a note in her hand. Carefully, she dragged her precious babies out of the living room and placed them in the kitchen. They laid before the overturned table. One last meal with her babies, she decided. Standing over them, she carefully placed one bullet into the barrel of the gun. Looking into the black hole of her salvation, she began to sing, her finger on the trigger. Pop! The gun did not hurt her head. April 1. God. Oh, see. God, oh God. I don't think I will forget. Ever. Right now, it is 12:23 in the morning, and I am awake. What the heck? I'm so tired I can barely move. But I can't sleep. For the past 2 nights, I have been having terrible dreams. Oh, God! Never in my life have ever experienced such terrifying things. I didn't write about my dream yesterday because I thought it was nothing. But now, I am so tired, but I can't close my eyes. Every time my eyes feel as though they can stay open no longer, the ghastly images flood back into my vision. How terrible they are. My dream tonight was the same as last, and I will never forget how it went. It starts with me in my room, and I am trying to fall asleep. It's all very eerie because it feels like I am still awake, lying in bed and experiencing insomnia. Just before I close my eyes and doze off, a clattering sound of breaking glass echoes down the hallway. My eyes flutter open, and I walk out into the hallway to find where the noise is from. But before I can reach the entry to the kitchen, another crash sounds. It doesn't come from the kitchen, so I continue to sweep through the rooms as I clutch my favorite blanket around my shoulders. After thoroughly searching every room for the culprit, I give up and go back to my room. But alas, this is where every fright comes into the story. I notice that my door is shut tightly when I come back, which is not how I left it. Now sweat seeps into my clothing. The house is suddenly very hot, so hot that I can't stand to have my protective blanket near me any longer. I frantically throw it onto the floor and decide to go into my room. I had the window open and it would certainly be cooler in there. I thrust my hand out and realized that now the door is slightly cracked open. I was certain that the door was fully shut only moments ago, and now it is slightly ajar. Nonetheless, I continue into my bedroom. It is almost too terrible to recall these dreams for you, but I will keep going so that you may all know what I am dealing with. The door squeaks an unnatural squeak, and it seems to open without me giving any sort of effort to push it. The window is still open, but the wind outside is stopped. It is very silent in the room, so silent that you can hear every soft step that I take. A dark shadow-like thing is spread across the floor in the corner of the room, flat as a piece of fabric. While keeping my eyes focused on the black thing, I shuffle slowly towards my bed. The room is very, very cold, and I wish that I had brought my blanket with me. The soft sheets of my bed are stiff and almost as cold as the rest of the room. I still pull the sheet over me, shivering and shaking. My eyes are still fixed on the big black shadow when ding, 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 dong! The alarm screeches so loud that my ears start to ring. My alarm clock is electronic, but in the dream, it sounds like church bells. I am trying to stay focused on the black thing, but big, bright flashes of color erupt from the screen on the clock, which I can see out of the corner of my eye. I cannot help but let my eyes wander to the screen of the clock, leaving myself defenseless against whatever thing sat in the corner of the room. In a bold font, the device read 12:02. That's when I heard a sharp hiss and ripped my head back towards the shadow. The lights in the background faded, as did the loud noises. When my eyes finally adjusted to the new darkness, I could see it. The shadow was no longer stretched out flat. It stood big and menacing in the shape of a very tall and giant man. I could not notice any features due to the pure black that it was colored, which was much darker than any night sky. And as it stood there, I could hear it say, "The dark we come from, the dark we are, come to look for us. You shall never be far. Your master calls, you can hear it hiss. The time has come when we stab, we do not miss." And with that, the shape splits apart, starting from the feet and ripping last at the head. It multiplies itself until the room is filled with clones of the first shadow. Next thing I know, the room is enveloped with darkness, and my bed is no longer beneath me. The chant that the first thing uttered was now being sung by multiple wispy voices, and it became louder and louder. The black floor below me drops away, and even though I can no longer see, I can still feel my stomach come racing upwards, and the air pummeling my skin. That's where the dream ends, but there is still one more important detail. Today and yesterday when I woke up, everything seemed normal, but the minute I woke up, the alarm clock next to my bed read 12:01. Despite my inability to slumber, I think this is where today's entry ends. Good night to you, but I believe that I will stay up and watch the news. It has to be better than whatever awaits me in my subconscious mind. April 2nd. Lord help me. I think I might be going insane. I am at work right now, but I am hiding this journal so that no one can see. As you know, I have been having these frightful terrors, but last night was the worst of all. Yesterday, I did as I said I would, and spent the rest of the morning with the television on. The daytime went fine, but as nighttime rolled around, I sat in the living room of my apartment and decided that I would wait one more day before sleeping in my room. For a while I sat there, but I couldn't stand to keep my eyes open any longer. I fell asleep, and just like that, I was back in the dream. It was almost the same as the last two, only the verses that the shadows sang were different. We know your soul. We were once you. The fear is present. We had that too. Your time is here. Do not resist. The master wants you. Just hold out your fist. But that was not the end of the night. When I read my watch, it said 12:01 p.m. But what troubled me was the temperature of the room. The thermostat said that it was 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but that could not have been right because it felt like an oven in there. And then I heard a crashing sound. Of course, it came from my bedroom, which had a tightly latched door that I did not remember shutting. Instead of investigating, I decided it would be best to simply wait out my time in the living room. The television was shut off, which was strange to me because I had never turned it off myself. I was so terrified by then that I was shaking all over and covered in all of the pillows and blankets that were on the couch. It was hot inside, but they were the only protection that I could find nearby. I used my trembling hand to switch the TV back on, and the night went on completely normally from that point on. So here I am now, sitting slumped over in my cubicle, keeping this diary hidden beneath me. Who knows what people would think of me if they read this? I have no idea what to think of myself now either, but I'd refuse to return to that house tonight. Instead, I asked to stay the night at my brother's home, which is only across the town from where I live. I hope that my next entry is a bit happier. April 4. I don't know what time it is, but it's probably close to 1:30 in the morning. I don't think I will ever check the time again. I had to leave. I thought that this might be the way for my family to know what happened to me. Yesterday night, I returned home with the confidence that no bad dreams were going to haunt me today. I spent the night before at my brother's home, and everything went very well. I didn't have any dreams at all, so I thought it would be okay to return home and sleep the next night. I went home and fell asleep in my bedroom. And of course, I had the dream once more. Only when I woke up, it was just 11:09. I was paralyzed with fear, and I watched as the clock switched to 12:00. My door flew open and smashed into the wall behind it. A huge black shadow, just like the one that was in my nightmare, flew through the door and started swelling up bigger. Its hissing voice was as loud as ever as it said, "4 times you have disobeyed. The Master wants you now, and you will come. The darkness in your soul is greater than others. You are destined to join us. Do not fight. This is what you are." And with that, it thrust its body forward and wrapped its slithering fingers around my neck. In a desperate attempt to hold myself in place, I reached for the bedside table just as the creature lifted me and tried to pull me towards the door. I slapped my hand down and a faint light appeared. The creature vanished as quickly as a hummingbird's wings can flap, and I was dropped to the ground. I realized that I had hit the top of my alarm clock, which had a button that shined a light to help you see. I left as quickly as I could. I am in a taxi right now, on its way to the river. I plan to jump in. I just cannot be alive when this is what I am living with. I'm sure you can understand. Wait. Now the car has stopped. The driver is not moving. He won't respond to me. The headlights just turned off. The whole car is shaking. Holy crap wine. When we stab, we do not miss. The boy should have known something was wrong the moment he glanced back over his shoulder. But he was too tired and wary and afraid to register the truth. He followed the sound of the keening pipe. Its unfamiliar melody, absurdly cheerful, jarred him from the carnage. It filtered through the pores of his skin and infused him with the strength and warmth he needed to run through the icy clutches of winter. The forest muffled the sounds within and beyond it as if the trees themselves swallowed noise, all but the tune of the unseen piper. Time stood still, cradled between the labyrinth of jutting roots and a cotton cloud sky that was falling apart. Tufts of snow floated down through naked branches as if massive pillowcases had exploded during a massive pillow fight between massive gods who did not care that far below them. The falling snow sizzled against flames that devoured a village. "Run," his mother had rasped, pushing him through the back door of their home, the door that led to the chickens and pigs, and he'd run until head fallen, slipping in the snow and in the refuse of the squealing animals, his vision fractured by his tears. He turned back then, ashamed to have run, ashamed to have left her, even though she no longer quite looked like his mother. Once she'd been beautiful, the belle of the village, people said. Then the red blotches appeared, lesions that began on her arms and spread across her chest and throat, an army of ants beneath her skin that disfigured her face and body. She did not cry out when she cut a finger or burnt her hands in the kitchen. Her once lush hair fell from her scalp like shorn wheat, littering the floor in clumps. Yet her eyes were always his mother's eyes, calm and blue and cool like a damp cloth against a fevered brow, radiating such love that he felt she embraced him, even when she avoided touching him. She was all he had left, the only person who cared enough to weep and caress his face when lesions spread it across his own back and grew thick like the pedicles of a second spine. When he crept back into the house, keeping to the shadows, the boy found nothing left of his mother but a dark stain on the floorboards that streaked from the kitchen to the bedroom. A man appeared in that doorway, his body and face sheathed in fabrics and spells that would not let the infection touch him, gripping a sword that wept red tears from its edge. The boy hid until the man turned away, and then sprinted back out into the night. He ran through the streets, dodging the hooves of horses and the torched firewood that the yelling soldiers threw his way. He fell only once, when something sharp hit his head. It seemed he opened his eyes mere seconds later. Snow filled his nostrils until he raised his head. Once he did, the scent of smoke engulfed him. The crackle of the fires was nearly drowned by screams that would not end. He scrambled to his feet. The snow beneath him stained crimson, as if with wine, and stumbled away from the slaughter and toward the trees. And so now he ran, torn by despair and fear, amazed that his matchstick legs could outrun the sinewy limbs of the armored horses and the fiery wrath of their riders' flamethrowers. He wished he could have found, could have lifted, the axe that had been his father's, with its handle longer than his arm, and swung it into the chest of anyone who dared approach his mother. He wished he had not left her when she pushed him out of their home. He wished he had not seen her blood upon the floor. He wished someone would have come to their village to cure instead of to eradicate. The forest echoed with the shrieks of women who fought and pled and bled as gloved soldiers dragged them through the streets and pushed them into burning homes, of men as their hands, along with the pitchforks or knives they held in them, were severed by swords whetted on the bones of prior villagers, of children who collapsed when those who chased them flung torches at their back. And above all this, the haunting croon of a pipe, promising all that a hurt little boy could desire. And so to that piping, this little boy fled. The more he ran, the stronger he felt. When he could no longer hear the screams and the flames, the boy realized what the song said, even though their words, no words. It spoke of melted snows and rays of sun that embraced all whom they touched like warm knit sweaters. It spoke of a father who opened his eyes as color filled his cheeks and laughter spilled from his mouth. It spoke of a mother whose skin was smooth and soft and smelled of vanilla and kneaded bread. It spoke of brothers and sisters who danced and teased and loved and lived, who picked him up when he scarred his knees and told him stories when he could not sleep. It spoke of a world where bad things couldn't come, where he could be free to grow old and weathered and well-loved like the most kindly of grandfathers. The boy ran faster, fast enough that it felt like he flew, anxious to get to the world the song spoke of. He even began to catch glimpses of the piper through the trees. Though he scampered and danced as he played his pipe, he appeared sometimes before, sometimes behind, and sometimes beside the boy. He wore a black hooded cloak that hid his face. Beneath it his clothes were pied, a patchwork of vibrant color impossible to miss whenever the wind whipped back the cloak. His pipe and fingers were white, of bone. And just like the boy, he left no footprints in the snow. Prelude. The rain pounded the small stone home outside of the city of Corinth. The storm raged, and the winds howled, and yet Lamia couldn't bring herself to acknowledge the storm's presence. All she could feel was the warm radiance of the god laying in bed next to her. His powerful arms wrapped around her body, making her feel safe and secure in the home. You more than any other mortal have captured my heart, Zeus said sleepily, a smile on his face as he gently stroked the hair out of Lamia's face. My heart is yours, now and forever, my lord, Lamia replied, reaching up and kissing his face gently. Lamia was the most beautiful woman of the village, her golden hair and sun-kissed skin making her desired by all. She was also known to be favored by the gods, most notably Zeus, who arrived at her home in the midst of a storm similar to the one playing out now, in the guise of a giant eagle. For you and only you, my love, I am not your lord. I am your love as you are mine, Zeus replied, his muscular frame flexing under her soft touch as he moved his mane of curly black hair from his eyes. He found her lips with his own and began to kiss her softly at first, gradually becoming hungrier as they felt the throes of passion overtake them once more. "So, this is where you have been sneaking off to, my darling husband," a voice beckoned. The two lovers jumped at the sound of the voice, and Zeus strode forward in the room, anger blooming in his eyes. "Who dares disrupt us?" he demanded before recognition took hold in his eyes. "Do you not recognize your wife, O mighty Zeus?" Hera asked, stepping out of the shadows as her own golden glow began to radiate the room. Long flowing red and gold hair hung down her back, as the white sash she wore revealed her toned and athletic body, one bestowed upon to all of the gods. "Hera, what is the meaning of this?" Zeus asked. "You have the audacity to feign anger at me, husband. You who have left the world with more bastard children than can fill a temple in my honor. How ridiculous! And to debase your godhood by laying with this mere mortal. Why, that is beyond dishonor. You should feel shame." "Shame for what?" "For loving and being loved. You forget your place, Hera. I am the king of the gods, and you will show me the respect I deserve. Save the melodrama for when we return to Olympus. You and I know that you and I have equal power. In fact, let me demonstrate," Hera replied, pushing past her husband and towards the bed, where Lumia still held her white sash to her naked form. "My goddess, forgive me. I did not," Lamia began to say, her words falling short of spilling out of her mouth as she stared upon the beautiful goddess standing before her. "I'm sure you felt obliged to heed your feelings, especially in the presence of my divine husband here. Yet an example must be made, and you sadly must pay the price for my husband's mistake. I pity you, mortal. Your mortal life is now at an end, and only hell awaits you," Hera replied. With the simple touch of her hand to Lamia's forehead, the young woman's life changed forever. Lamia howled in agony as pain took hold of her. She could feel her skin peeling and cracking in places, while her hair fell out and her bones cracked. Her teeth sharpened and her ears grew pointed, and Lumia felt her humanity shed off of her as easy as a wolf's skin. "Zeus, my love, help me," Lamia cried, her voice growing heavy and rough as her transformation continued. Zeus watched in horror as the woman he loved twisted and turned into a hideous beast, and his heart broke at the sight. Chapter 1. Quinn Ford woke to the bright light of a California morning streaming in through the blinds of the beach house. The soothing sound of the waves crashing on the shore nearby was relaxing, and Quinn found himself fighting to stay awake. As he turned away from the bright morning light, he came face to face with Iris Walsh, his amazing girlfriend, and the world brightened once more. The weekend trip had come together perfectly. Quinn had surprised Iris with the weekend plans, and thankfully, she had jumped at the opportunity. He needed a break from his latest novel, Baseline, and a weekend not answering another panicked call from his agent Helen was a welcome addition. Now in his 30s, Quinn found himself drawn more to peaceful and romantic weekends rather than the party life most 20-somethings craved for all week long. He'd been lucky to meet Iris in the first place. Iris Walsh was a 30-year-old photographer and makeup artist living in Los Angeles. He'd been working on his book in a bookshop cafe and had noticed her sitting at the table next to him. Her face had been scrunched up as she studied something on her laptop, and he noticed she was drinking the same thing as him. He'd always been shy, and so he had hesitated talking to her at first, not knowing what to say. However, as he worked on his book, he found himself surprised when she sat down on the couch next to him, setting her laptop down. He looked up to see her looking at him, her emerald green eyes drawing him in immediately. "Sorry, the couch looked much more comfortable than the damn chair over there," she said, her Irish accent punching through and enticing him like music in the air. That's all right. Always plenty of room for a fellow vanilla late drinker, he joked, hoping his face was as blushed as he felt in that moment. He always felt awkward sitting next to a beautiful woman. As a heavy-set man, he always worried it would be the only thing a woman would be able to fixate on when talking to him. Yet, Iris was different, never once breaking eye contact with him. Hey, these vanilla lates are delicious. I never had them back home, but damn are they good. Is that an Irish accent I'm detecting? Where in Ireland are you from? Sandymount, a small village outside Dublin on the coast. Just moved here a couple years ago. Name's Iris. Iris Walsh. The young woman introduced herself as Quinn. Quinn Ford, he replied, and the rest was history as the saying goes. Now looking into Quinn's beautiful face and trailing his hand down her body, he could honestly say he'd never felt happier. Today was the day he told himself. Today, he would ask her to move in with him in his loft in L.A. It had been a few months since they'd met, and she brought the best out of him, and he hoped she felt the same way. At least enough to say yes to his idea. "Good morning, darling," Iris said, smiling without opening her eyes. "How do you always know when I'm awake?" Quinn asked, smiling. "It's one of my superpowers, love," she replied, opening her eyes and smiling. "You are my superwoman. Did you get some good sleep? I always do when I'm next to you. What did you want to do today? Do you have to work?" "Nope. Today I'm all yours. I was thinking we could have a late breakfast, early lunch, lay on the beach, and then take a moonlit stroll along the beach before dinner. I thought we'd check out the caves near the Pinnacles National Park. What do you say?" "I say that sounds a plan. Want to take a shower first?" "You read my mind," he replied, following her out of bed as the sheets fell from their bodies and they ran into the bathroom, quickly shutting the door behind them. Chapter 2. It had been a whirlwind day for the young couple in love. A hearty breakfast buffet, followed by a long lounge on the beach in their bathing suits, was the perfect recipe for a weekend getaway. Quinn could feel the anticipation building up inside him, wanting the night to come so he could finally ask her to move in with him. The nerves were intense, and he hoped that his instincts were right on this one. Yet, as they lay together, Iris laying her head on his chest, Quinn couldn't help but feel like something was bothering her. She felt distant at times, almost like her mind was 1,000 miles away. Yet he didn't let that deter him. Instead, he told himself he was just psyching himself out of doing what he had set out to do. And so he moved forward with the day. As night descended, the young couple walked hand in hand along the trail of the Pinnacles National Park. The waves nearby crashed against the rocks as they walked, and Quinn breathed in the ocean air around them. "Today has been the perfect day," Iris said, her smile stretching into a grin as she looked up into his eyes. "It really has been," he replied, leaning down and kissing her on the lips softly, before either one of them could say another word. The night air was pierced by the sound of a low growl. The couple tensed, their hearts stopping in their chests as they turned and saw a large pair of red eyes staring at them from the darkness of the trail they'd just walked. "Iris, we have to move," Quinn said. "Whatever that thing is, it's blocking our path back to the car," Iris replied. "There's a cave nearby. If we can find some high ground in there, maybe whatever it is will move on. I don't have anything to fight it off with, so we gotta take a chance here," Quinn replied. "I feel like we're being cornered," Iris said. "So do I, babe, but I don't think we have a choice. That thing is inching closer to us," Quinn began to say. Before either one could make a move, the creature stepped into the moonlight, and they gasped in horror as a massive wolf trailed down towards them. Tufts of black fur and pearly white teeth glistened in the moonlight, and its eyes seemed to blaze with fire as it walked closer and closer to them. Quinn and Iris began to make a move to run, but as they turned, they both found themselves caught on a large root, and the tumble sent them falling into the mouth of the cave below. Don't. Quinn opened his eyes as pain shot through the back of his head, stars exploding behind his eyelids as he returned to consciousness. The world around him was blurry, but he could see the outline of a large fire burning in front of him. As he swatted away the cobwebs from his memory, his vision cleared, and he saw he was laying inside of a large cave. He could still hear the crashing of the waves from the mouth of the cave, and the memory of being chased by the wolf came flooding back. "Iris!" Quinn shouted, but before he could sit up, pain shot through him once more, and a cold marble finger laid against his lips. "Shh, hush now, babe. It's all right now." A soothing voice called out, and he watched as Iris crawled next to him. She was a vision of beauty, as always. Her flowing white satin dress and porcelain skin seemed to shine in the light of the fire, and her piercing eyes held his gaze as she slowly climbed and straddled him, her soft hands slowly wiping the hair from his face. "Iris, are you all right?" Quinn asked, his voice sounding as if it were coming from a great distance away. "We're both okay, my love. Just be here with me now," Iris said simply, her lips bearing down on his own in a powerful and ravenous motion. He'd never felt such intensity from her, and he felt weak in her presence. As she looked into his eyes, however, he saw her eyes change from green to red, and the world came crashing down around him. "You're not Iris," Quinn said in shock, pushing the mystery woman off of him as he pushed himself against the rock wall behind him. "More clever than most," the woman replied, her voice gravelly and a growl erupting from her throat. Quinn watched in horror as Iris disappeared, and in her place, a hideous, monstrous crone stood in her place. Her skin was split apart and cracked, her hair was missing and large, sharp teeth pierced through her lower lip. Her eyes blazed red, and her mouth began to open wide, as if she were unhinging her lower jaw. A large howl escaped from her mouth, and Quinn found himself locked in terror. "Quinn!" a voice shouted, and he looked to his right to see Iris, his Iris, sitting along the rock wall a few feet away from him. The creature before him screamed, turning its attention on Iris and crawling quickly towards his girlfriend. Iris let out a scream as the creature got closer, a long black forked tongue shooting out and running down Iris' face. The creature suddenly pulled back, a laugh piercing the cavern as it glared down at the young woman. "I can smell it. The child has begun growing inside you," the creature said, laughing all the while. Quinn looked on in shock as Iris met his gaze, and tears streamed down her face. "I was planning on telling you at dinner. I was afraid you'd be scared off. We've only been dating a few months, and I thought the news would," Iris began to say, tears hanging like crystals in the corners of her eyes. "Iris, it's okay. That's the best news you could have ever given me. I was going to ask you to move in with me tonight." "I guess your news trumps mine," Quinn joked, tears and laughs escaping them both as the horror of their situation began to sink in more and more. "The child will make you a much more delicious meal," the creature hissed, unhinging its jaw once more. Iris screamed as the creature moved to strike, never noticing Quinn leaping forward and pushing Iris out of the way. As he did so, the creature's teeth ripped out a chunk of Quinn's side, just as its razor-sharp claws ripped into his chest. "No!" Iris shouted, just as the creature released Quinn and sent him hurtling to the ground. Iris crawled over and held Quinn in her arms, turning him over so she could see his face. Tears streamed down her face as blood seeped out of his wounds. "Why? Why would you do that?" the creature asked, shock and awe taking hold as it stared down at its victim. Because I love her. I love her. Love her enough to die. To die for her, Quinn said, his breath shortening as the blood loss began to set in. The sound of his voice and his words pierced the night air, and the creature suddenly began to howl in agony, flinging itself to the ground as pain engulfed it. The creature's body began to transform suddenly, just as a brilliant light of white and gold engulfed the cavern. Iris shielded her and Quinn's eyes just as a man stepped out of the light. He was a chiseled specimen, his body glowing, and his eyes piercing as he took in the scene around them. Who are you? Iris asked. You modern mortals would not believe me, but I am Zeus, the man replied, leaning down as the creature before him began to transform. Its hideous appearance began to disappear, and in its place, a beautiful young woman appeared. Iris watched as the creature vanished, and Zeus wiped the blood from the woman's ruby lips. What is happening? Iris asked. You two mortals have freed my love from her curse, Zeus replied. My wife, Hera, cursed the woman lying here in my arms centuries ago. For my infidelity, she cursed this innocent woman to become the monster you see before you. I helped her the best I could, giving her her powers and a place to hide whenever humanity began to encroach on her home. I searched for centuries for a cure, secluding myself in the heart of Olympus until they found a cure for me. Cure? Iris asked. True love. I should have known, but my wife is clever. An act of true love saved my beloved Lamia from her curse. Quinn sacrificed himself for you, my dear, and that love pierced the curse entirely. For that I shall heal your love. I apologize for the pain we've caused you. Mortals, Lamia, rest now, my love. Iris watched as the man and woman disappeared in a brilliant glow of light. As they did, Quinn took a massive breath, and she watched as his wounds healed. Looking up into her eyes, he cupped her face in his hands and smiled. Iris, he said, tears streaming down his face. Quinn, she breathed, tears pouring out of her. I love you, he replied, resting his hand on her face and his free hand on her stomach. I love you too, with all my heart, she replied, leaning down to kiss him and resting her hand on her stomach as well. Glad to be alive and well once more. At that moment, love had truly won. Jagged white flakes tumbled to the earth. Collect on the wood piled beneath the cabin's frosted window. Fuel for the only remaining source of heat since the power went out. Carmen extricates her grip from the back of the puke green couch and faces the spacious living room. A circular rug spans between her, a matching recliner, a stone hearth, and oak shelves displaying antique cookbooks and a tiny wooden train. Viola returns from one of two other rooms, a sweet fragrance mingling with that of charred timber. Her arms are loaded with two mugs, a hot pad, and a reusable grocery bag. Light blares from the phone tucked under her chin, its only useful function this far from civilization. I found cocoa. It's peppermint your favorite. No, it's yours. Treats should never taste like toothpaste. Carmen swallows the retort, dropping to the floor. Great. Viola fishes the castoron kettle from the coals, her ruby pendant taunting the flames. As she fills the cups, steam flows over the lip, billows up, catching her hand. She seethes a breath between her teeth. Carmen takes her cup, clicking her new manicure against the flowery porcelain. What kind of 90-year-old woman lives this far out? Has backup cocoa but not a generator. I think it's sweet. Viola shrugs. Kinda reminds me of my gran, but less racist. Carmen never met the woman who agreed to pay a complete stranger to house us in. But When she told Viola it was a bad idea to go alone, even to help a sweet old lady, Viola suggested she come along. Carmen should have refused. Cheer up. She'll be back to take us down the mountain in the morning. And Viola rummages in the sack, then with a flourish present 2 bags of marshmallows. Your choice of small colored or large? Carmen points to the lump of pastels. Great choice, then. We can do s'mores too. Carmen's stomach gurgles and she takes a pensive sip of cocoa. Minty lava scalds the tip of her tongue. Is there anything more substantial? Viola peeks the bag open. There's chocolate pretzels. Carmen runs a hand over her face. Did the old woman possess any teeth? With a weighted sigh, she accepts them. For a time, the only sounds are those of sweets being consumed and wind battering the tiny cabin. Then a rumble sounds out front, accompanied by a piercing whine, a bit like an angry engine. Carmen scrambles for the sofa. She stares into the uncanny brightness of a snowy night, breath clouding the glass. But there's nothing in the driveway. The sound cuts off. In the space of a blink, the shadow from the base of one tree leaps out across the expanse of white and into the next. A breath snags in Carmen's throat, her stomach twisting into painful knots. Did you see that? Carmen doesn't take her gaze from the tree's base. That shadow, it moved. Maybe it was a raccoon jumping between branches, Viola says, a tremor to her voice. It's no doubt cold enough to drive any sane creature to its burrow, even if raccoons did jump like that, but Carmen nods. Viola turns back to the fire, using her mug-free hand to coax another log atop the flames. Ah, crap. What? Carmen's gaze snaps to her friend. What? We're down to 2 logs. Viola shifts the contents of the tinderbox and her brow slumps. Make that 1 and a handful of sticks. A chill crawls down Carmen's spine. She could have sworn the box was full a minute ago. We could just go to bed? Come on. If only there's a sharp click and light blares from Viola's phone, like 7, and we don't need power to have fun. Carmen's face scrunches. Doing what? Freezing? Viola casts her eyes skyward. There's more wood right outside the door. But Carmen's chest constricts. She glances back out the window. Viola's lips twist. Want to... A sharp scraping rents the air, burrows into Carmen's skull. She smashes her palms against her ears, though the sound is gone. Time stretches out into an amorphous thing that could be a moment or an eternity. At some point, Carmen's lungs begin to function again. Viola drags on her coat, faux fur tufted around its hood and sleeves. You aren't seriously going out there. We need more firewood, and I'd like to know what that was. But we'll never find out cowering in here, Viola says, a slight tremor behind her harsh words. If a tree fell on the roof, we may need to do something to keep snow from getting in. That didn't sound like a tree falling. But having never heard one, Carmen's argument flounders and dies on her tongue. Viola flicks her phone light on. Be back in a minute. There's a rush of cold, upending every follicle on Carmen's being, and the door snaps shut behind Viola. Snow crunches, wind howling between the trees in the hollows of the house. Then nothing. Not so much as the whisper of a falling leaf. A reek like decay steeped in gingerbread seeps through the cabin's cracks. Dark rain blotches the snow, forming great crimson patches. Not rain, blood. Sound returns. With a wet plink, a mangled hand lands atop the woodpile. Carmen clutches her mouth, backing from the window. Viola. The word come out a strangled question. The door rattles. Carmen glances around, pulse thundering in her ears. Her gaze falls on the poker, and she snatches it up. The knob turns. She tightens her grip. Smoky claws wrap the door frame. They grow denser, lightening into wrinkled human fingers. The door swings wide, and in walks a stooped woman with gray wisps of hair. Carmen's shoulders slump, blood returning to her fingers. The old woman tilts her head at Carmen and grins, revealing jagged teeth dripping scarlet. And resting on her age-spotted chest is Viola's ruby pendant. Carmen sucks in a breath. Smoke coils from the old lady, her body becoming less solid. The poker rattles in Carmen's grasps. Sound blinks out, and darkness envelops her.